Welcome back. The United States and Ukraine have signed a deal which gives Washington access to Kyiv's rare natural resources in exchange for military aid. This comes months after US President Donald Trump and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky had a spat at the White House, and days after they met at the Vatican during Pope Francis's funeral. This time, Zelensky has touted the deal as truly equal and fair. The deal covers 55 minerals, including rare earth minerals, as well as oil and natural gas. Ukraine will retain complete control of resources and decide what can be extracted and where. Earlier, Trump's demand that Ukraine must compensate the US for past aid was a big bone of contention between the two, but the new deal does not require Ukraine to pay back the US. Also, the profits from future mineral projects will be reinvested exclusively in Ukraine for the first 10 years, after which they can be shared between the two countries. The deal does not provide any formal security guarantees for Ukraine to future Russian aggression. However, it takes a much harsher stance on Russia than its previous iteration. It refers to Russia's full-scale invasion and states that no state or person who financed or supplied the Russian war machine will be allowed to benefit from the reconstruction of Ukraine. To take this forward, I'm now joined by Shelby Magid, Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Shelby, thank you very much for joining us on Global Eye. Let me begin by asking you, how does this immediately benefit the US at a time when China has put restrictions and non-tariff barriers on the export of rare earth minerals, materials, magnets to the rest of the world?
Thanks for having me. So this is important for the US, and I would say also for all of NATO and certainly for Ukraine. This is a strategic move from the US because we need these minerals, these resources that you've mentioned, and it's helpful for our own national security to be looking at getting these from friends and not being entirely reliant on Chinese supply chains. So there will not be an immediate influx of these minerals, but it's immediately useful to put ourselves in that strategic position of getting this groundwork of these foundations and agreements going.
Right. So give us a sense of how this will function. There will be a reconstruction fund for Ukraine. 50% of Ukraine's revenues from exploitation of new projects will go into this fund. How much will US be contributing, and what will be the channel of investment?
You know, a lot of that will still be worked out, and we're just getting started. So what we're focusing on right now, especially in Washington, is the political significance of this. And so this is a warming in the US-Ukraine relationship that comes alongside, as we see, I think, a souring in US-Russia. There's a lot of focus on the peace talks and the momentum or lack of momentum there. As for what the US contributes, those specifics will be worked out. But one very important thing to note is that there was mention of future military aid, and that, as you mentioned earlier, it's not just paying back. This is now a forward-looking deal. And this was the first time the Trump administration has talked about future potential military support for Ukraine. So that could be a significant element that still has to be worked out. Packages still have to be put forward. Congress will get involved, but that could have a huge amount that would go into this.
Right. What's going to be the message to Russia?
The message to Russia, and I would say this has probably been a very bad week for Putin and for Russia, is that the US is committed to Ukraine. And there have been times since President Trump was campaigning and took office where that was in question. There's been a range of comments that have come out of his office and his administration. But the comments around signing this deal have been very strong and very clear. The US is committed to seeing a free, sovereign, and prosperous Ukraine, sees a partnership with Ukraine, and this puts Ukraine in a light that President Trump cares about. He is interested in economic benefits, he's interested in these minerals, and now he's even more invested in Ukraine. And so Russia should be worried about that because they've been trying to play President Trump to a certain extent, and it's not working. He's fed up. So they're going to have to change tactics.
Right. Does this deal provide fair treatment to Ukraine over its natural resources?
It's a good question because there was a lot of concern about earlier versions of this deal. Rightfully, the Ukrainians pushed back, and I think they did a really good job, very professionally, very seriously, negotiating with the US to get to what is now a fair deal. This is more of a partnership. The words colonial had been thrown around before on earlier versions, and we've now moved forward. We're not there. Ukraine maintains control of their own resources. There's aspects of the deal that makes sure that anything moving forward aligns with Ukraine's EU aspirations. And this is all focused on their future and their benefit. So this is in a much better place now.
Right. Now, in terms of bringing this war to an end, what kind of leverage does this provide the United States over negotiations with Putin? And where does this place Ukraine in direct talks with Russia and in the war?
You know, where we are in the negotiation seems to change by the day. And there's a lot of frustration from the Trump administration. And I would say rightfully so, that they do not feel that Putin is ready to end the war and that he's meaningfully made concessions. But there's still this desire for peace. And I would say that's on the Ukrainian and the American side. As for leverage, the US has plenty of leverage over Russia. And that's aside from just this minerals deal. There's legislation that is being considered in the Senate that Senator Graham is leading on that has at least 72 senators, bipartisan, looking to put more economic pressure on Russia. There's more the US can do, and if they are invested in Ukraine and in seeing Ukraine as a free, sovereign, prosperous nation, they will need to apply more pressure on Russia. So overall, now being in a better place with the US-Ukraine relationship puts that in a more likely position to kind of move on Russia in that way, economically at least.
Right. Right. And Shelby, my final question to you would be, could this be now a template for future deals that the United States may want to sign with other nations on critical minerals? And the reason why I ask is because when you have things like rare earth magnets or lithium, the processing of it, almost 75, 80% to even 90% in some cases, happens in China. So do you think the US would now replicate this model with more nations?
I think it's a good question. I hear that there are others being considered. And so I think it's something that other countries should be looking at. And they should see that you can learn from Ukraine that the first offer that comes to you is not the one you need to end up with, but to engage smartly, carefully, and hopefully end up with something mutually beneficial.
All right. Shelby, thank you so much for joining us on the program, giving us your view on the very critical US-Ukraine minerals deal, which is a strong message to Russia about continued support to Ukraine in the war that has been on for many, many months now. That's all we have time for here on Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.